Hey guys, welcome back to the next part of this chapter. Today we're going to start with an exercise that's going to be covering pretty much everything that we've seen so far in regards to theory. So let's go. This is the file that I have ready for you guys. Some of you are familiar with this one because I shared it with you on the animation course. We did a little bit of a quick rigging understanding of how rigs worked. But now we're actually going to do the rig. And the rig that I shared on that course was not finalized. It was actually just a very basic rig. Now we're going to do a proper rig for this thing. Now there's going to be two files on your file folders here. There's going to be this robot arm start and robot arm start lights. If you have a powerful computer and you want to work with textures and lights like I'm doing right here, you can use the lights one. It's just a skydome light from Arnold that I changed the scale back to 0 so that we don't see it on the screen, but it's actually contributing. And an ambient light to just fill the scene a little bit. If you don't want to work with lights, that's fine. Just press number 5 and you're going to be back into grayscale. I just think it looks very, very fancy to work with lights. So we're going to do lights and textures just to make it look a little bit nicer for the audience. And of course, at the end, you're going to have the, I'm actually going to save this one now, the robot arm rig, the final rig, so that you can check that you did everything right. The textures and everything are already set up for you. They're going to be on your source images folder as well, and Arnold is ready to render. So we have this robot arm right here, and it's a single geometry. This is going to be really, really important. Let me turn off anti-aliasing. This is a single object that we're going to be rigging. In the other example, in the past video or in the past series, it was made out of different parts, and they were just like parented to a single object. But we're actually going to be skinning this thing to the joint setup that we're going to be creating. So before we start drawing joints and trying to see how we're going to be making this thing work, we need to do a little bit of planning. So I'm going to go to the right view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into here my little grease pencil. And let's quickly sketch out what kind of rig we want. So I know we're going to have a joint right here that's going to control the whole thing. This is going to be called the root joint. And it's one of the most important joints in a rig. Then I know that we have this section right here that just kind of like rotates around. So we're definitely going to have another joint right about there. Then this section right here also rotates around in the y-axis. So I'm going to have another one right there. And after this one, there's really no more rotations until we hit this part right here on the top. So on this area, we're going to have another joint. But this one is not going to have the rotation on this axis. It's going to be on this axis. Oh my God, sorry. So I believe this is the x-axis. It's going to be rotating on the x-axis. Then they're going to have another joint right here. That's also going to be rotating on the x-axis. And finally, one more joint right here. That's also going to be rotating on the x-axis. Then we're going to have another joint here on the little head. It's going to rotate on the y-axis again. So we're going to have this rotation so that we can move the head around. And then each individual little leg that we have right here will have an independent joint like this. That's going to create a rotation on its own axis. And this is the interesting part. That's why I created this robot when I first started teaching rigging, because this is going to teach us how the local rotation axis of the objects are super, super important. Okay, so that's the general thing. I'm actually going to print screen here, and let me jump into Photoshop real quick. Just gonna save this. I'll save the image so that you guys can reference the rotations that we're gonna have if you need to. So I'm gonna delete this whole thing now, and it's time that we start placing our joints. Now there's a couple of ways in which we can do it. We can create a chain like we did in the past couple of videos where I show you the joint chains, or we can do it individually. And I'm gonna do it individually just to show you how we can then, after placing the joints, we can then create a proper structure. So I'm gonna start with my basic joint there. I'm gonna hit enter. I'm not seeing it. Where is the joint? Okay, I think this is the thing that I've mentioned about. So in the viewport 2.0, I'm gonna say alpha cut. And let's select there. Oh, don't tell me it's because of the light. Where is the joint? Oh, no, you know what? Joint, show, and joints. Just to make sure that we're seeing the joints. There we go. So I think we can have lights. Can we have lights, Mr. Maya? Yeah, we can. Perfect. So this joint right here, I'm gonna go right view. And we're going to snap it with X to the center of the grid. That's going to be my root joint. And I'm actually going to zero it out so that it's perfectly flat on the ground. And I'm going to call this root underscore GNT because that's the root joint. And this root joint, we don't need to change its local rotation axis. I'm going to turn it on just to see it because it's very common that the root joint is oriented exactly the same way as the world, because it's very common to just grab this guy and move it around. So we're gonna leave that one perfectly, or just like that. Then I'm gonna duplicate this guy, and I'm gonna position this on the middle section of the next part, which is this cylinder right here. Now, the cool thing about geometry, of course, is that we have vertices that we can snap to. So see that vertex there? I'm just gonna press V, and I'm gonna snap a joint right there. And I'm gonna move it down a little bit, just so that it's as close to the center as possible. So something like this. There we go. And you can see that this joint is slightly off center, but it's fine because it's on the center of the object that we want to move, which is this one. Now the question will be, well, if we parent these joints together, this joint is not pointing towards this one. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily, because this joint, since this is a mechanical object, as long as the rotation that they're portraying is working good for the object itself, then we're going to be just fine. So I'm just going to grab this joint again, and this is going to be called, let's call this robot, say RA is going to be our initials, robot arm, and then let's call this base A underscore GNT. Now we're going to duplicate, move up, and we have this next part, which again we can snap our joint to the center right there and move it as close as possible to the center line. Doesn't have to be perfect, don't worry. You can snap it, of course. Like if we snap, that's going to be dead center, so that works fine. And this is going to be robot arm base V joint, and that's it. That's why it's very important to have the clear or the clean names, because eventually we're going to be doing the skinning, and in order to clean the skinning in the best possible way, we need to make sure that things are working very, very nicely. So there we go. Our base A joint, base B joint, and we're ready. We're good to go. We can continue. So I'm gonna grab this guy right here, and now the next bone, if you remember, we were talking about this. The next bone that we're gonna have is this one right here, which will grab all of these faces and just like move them down, right? So the whole arm is gonna rotate from this point. I know that this machine or this robot arm is not. It wouldn't work on the real world. It's not made to be realistic. It's just meant to show you the ways that the rigging works. Let's turn on X-ray there. I'm gonna grab this guy right here, duplicate it, and I'm gonna position it in the middle of the cylinder, of the main cylinder, which is this one right here. So that's the point, which means I'm gonna grab this guy. We can use wireframe unshaded here to make it a little bit easier. And then with W and V, I'm just gonna snap it right there. Now, for let's say clarity's sake, I'm gonna snap this thing to the middle of the arm, which is roughly where we're gonna be using the rotation to rotate the whole thing. So I'm gonna just snap it right there. Now this one does need, actually, that seems to be off center. Let me check it real quick. Yeah, I think we moved it accidentally, so I'm just gonna recenter it right there. There we go. So when we move this thing, when we rotate this thing, we want this thing to rotate the whole thing, okay? Now we're gonna go to the right view again, grab this one. Oh, of course, this one we need to change the name. This is gonna be robot arm joint. And then we're gonna duplicate and snap it to the next one, which again is right about there. Make sure that we snap it to the center. There we go. This is gonna be robot arm B joint, and we remove that one. Do one more. Let's go right view. Oh, just delete that camera. We don't need it. Control D, and we snap it all the way down here to this little pivot point. There we go. And again, we go to the center point and we snap it to the center like that. There we go. This is gonna be robot arm Z. Then we have this little head. So this face right here, and I thought about like moving the whole thing here, like all of these elements. I want them to kind of like rotate on its own axis. So I'm gonna grab this guy, Control D, and I'm gonna position it. There's a vertex down here, that one right there. It's gonna be my pivot point, my rotation point. So that one right there. So when I rotate this thing, the whole little thing is gonna rotate as well. This I'm gonna call robot arm head joint. And now comes the interesting part. Now, as you can see, the joints are a little bit too big. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab all of them and I'm going to change the scale or the radius, not the scale, the radius of the bones to something like 0.2, which I think is going to be a little bit better so that we can see what's going on. And the radius does not matter at all. It's something that's just visual. You can have like super big bones or super small bones and it's completely fine. It's just for simplicity's sake. Now, here's where things are going to get interesting. I'm going to have to place a bone that goes in here in the little like leg of the head, and then I'm gonna have to find a way to rotate so that when we do the movement, all of the little legs right here move in the same way and close together. So that's where rotation axes come into place. I'm gonna go here, and this first leg is probably the easiest one, so I'm just gonna Control D, and I'm gonna move it. There's no pivot points. I'm just gonna move it there on the center like that. And then I'm gonna duplicate this one and I'm gonna position it on the point or the tip here. The only reason why I want to position it on the tip is for visual sake, because these tips are not gonna be moving anything. The main important bones are gonna be these ones up here. So I'm gonna call this let's call this finger A underscore joint, and then the one that we copy is gonna be finger A tip, because it's the tip underscore joint. There we go. So now, before we do the other fingers, we need to clean up our elements. We could leave it like this, like it's not gonna be any, we're not gonna create any sort of issue if we just skin like this. But I want to teach you guys the proper way to align things, so that we can get some clean geometries or clean joints here. So I'm gonna hide the geometry. You can press Alt-2 to hide the geometry for just a second, and let's start parenting. So I know that this guy. Actually, I'm going to know that this guy is a son of this guy, so I'm going to grab one and then the other and hit P. And this guy is the son of this one, and I'm going to hit P, and that's fine. So those three guys, those are perfectly fine. But now for this guys right here, I would like the bones to be pointing towards the next bone, in this case with the y-axis. So I'm going to grab driven, and I'm going to say constraint, aim constraint, and I'm going to point with the y-axis, and I'm going to use the x-axis in this case, over here, to try and get this. Okay, so as you can see now I'm pointing, or actually I think I would like the y-axis to point in a different way. Let's see if we can use another one. Okay, I'm gonna show you something cool here. So now I'm pointing towards the y-axis in the proper way. The constraint I no longer need. I just used it to get this first position. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rotate this thing with snap rotate here. I'm going to press E, click, and select discrete rotate. And I'm going to rotate this until we are using until the x-axis is pointing towards the x-axis, like this. So now the y-axis is properly pointing towards the front, but the x-axis is properly pointing towards the side. Now this one, I'm going to do the same thing. So this one, of course, we're going to do a freeze transformation to clean everything. We're going to do the same for all of them, actually. And then we're going to say driven, and apply. So now it's pointing with the y-axis. We don't need the aim constraint anymore. And we're just going to rotate this thing so that the x-axis is pointing to the side. It should be... Let me properly align this. There we go. There we go. And we're, of course, going to delete our freeze transformation. So now you can see that the y-axis is nicely pointing to the next section. I think we missed one step here. Did we? Let's go to the front view and see if we're aligned or not. It seems like we're not aligned. Okay, let's give it another shot. So I'm just gonna say, let's go here again. Driven. We are gonna point with the x-axis and the up vector instead of the x. Let's do C. There we go. That's a little bit close. But what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna say -C. So that way the x-axis, as you can see, it's now properly pointing to the x-axis. Perfect. So same deal here. 1, 2, driven. We're pointing with the y-axis and we're using -C. So we're pointing the C towards the floor. And we're gonna hit apply. And as you can see, now everything is aligned properly. I'm also seeing that things are not completely aligned here. Like, see how each of them are in a different position? That shouldn't be the case. but it's not making it difficult, so we're just gonna keep going. And then finally this guy, let's bring the geometry back, Alt 2. That guy I'm actually gonna leave like this. I want to keep it like this because it's easier to just like grab the x-axis at this point and just move it back and forth. This one I'm also gonna leave with the world because it's very easy to just grab this with the y-axis and move it. But this one, the final one, we definitely want to use the tip. So I'm gonna grab this guy, driver, driven, and we want to point with the y-axis again and try to keep the x in that way. So apply, and there we go. Now, all of these constraints we don't need anymore. We just use them to properly set up the whole thing. And now we can start connecting everything else. So this guy and this guy, it's a parent. This guy and this guy hit the P, that's a parent. Or this guy and this guy, that's a parent. This guy and that guy, that's a parent. And finally this guy and this guy, that's a parent. And of course this guy is gonna go towards this guy, and that's gonna be a parent. But before we parent that, I wanna create this guy and this guy, that's a parent. I don't care about the rotation of the tip because the tip we're not gonna be using. We're only gonna be moving this guy right here. And as you can see, this is gonna be a very clean movement. So I'm gonna grab all of the fingers and I'm just gonna freeze transformation. So that, again, every single rotation, everything is clean. Very important that we do that. And I wanna keep this same orientation but duplicate it towards the other parts of the characters or the elements. So what am I gonna do here? Very easy. I'm gonna grab this joint chain and I'm gonna Control G to group it. And then the pivot point of this group, I'm gonna move it to the bone right here, to the next bone in the hierarchy, which is this one. And then this group, I'm gonna duplicate and rotate. So now, as you can see, when we rotate this group, the orientation of the original joint, the little finger that we have here, remains the same. And that's gonna make it super easy for us to animate everything. So I'm just gonna rotate it like this. I don't remember the exact, I think 120 was the right one. So I'm gonna leave it like that. Even if the bone is not perfectly aligned, that's fine. Like we could just like grab the group here and just like align it a little bit better. Since translation is not what I'm worried about, that's perfectly fine. I'm gonna grab the first group again, Control D, and then rotate to the other side. Should be right there. And again, I'm just gonna move it because again, movement is not something I'm worried about. And there we go. So now, before we finish this like little connection thing, I'm gonna clean this up. So this one is gonna be B, the B finger, and this is gonna be the C finger. So the groups there only helped us to create the proper orientations. Now I'm just gonna grab all of these three guys and I'm gonna parent them to this guy. And as you can see, we keep the same orientations that we had. Each of them is pointing with the y-axis and with the x-axis to the proper orientation. And these groups are no longer needed, so we can just delete them. I'm gonna grab the root joint, I'm gonna freeze transformation, and when we do that, it freezes the transformation of everything. Now look at this beautiful thing. If we grab all three fingers here, not the tips, just the fingers, and we select rotation and we rotate in X, they're all gonna rotate at the same time in the same direction. And eventually they're gonna just like get together there, and we're gonna get a very nice effect where all of them, by just moving one single channel, by just moving the X channel in the same value, in the same direction, we're gonna get this sort of like mirror effect. This principle that I'm showing you guys here, how to properly align things to get the best out of the rotations, it's going to be super, super important. And we're going to use it for fingers, we're going to use it for the neck, for the legs, for the arms. Like there's a lot of things we're going to do for the final character. And it's very important that you understand that the local rotation axes of these things are all following the same sort of degree. Okay? So now our let's just call this RA. Our joint is ready. Our whole skeleton is ready. We have the proper situation for the thing, and now we can do the rigging. There's several schools of thoughts in here. Some people like to do the skinning first, some people like to do the controllers first. I'm going to show you the skinning first because it's a little bit easier, and that way we can make sure that everything is working properly, and then we'll move on to controllers, where we'll be adding each controller and making sure that it moves exactly what it needs to move. Now, for the skinning, we actually don't need this guys right here, the tips. Some people like to keep them to to keep the visual like idea of where things are going. I personally don't think that's useful, so I am gonna delete them, and we're just gonna be using this little 3 right here. That way we're gonna keep it simple. They're gonna do the exact same thing. You need to just imagine that they have like an invisible joint coming out of them. But if you want to keep the tips, then that's completely fine as well. And yeah, so that's it for this video, guys. Make sure you get your skeleton looking like this, like completely nice. All of the arms, for instance, this first arm and this second arm, they're pointing towards the next one just to keep it clean. These guys are oriented to the world. These 2 guys are also oriented to the world. And of course, the little things here are oriented towards the tip that we just deleted. So that's where it should be. That's the result that you should have. And with this, we're ready to jump onto skinning. So hang on tight, and I'll see you back on the next one. Bye-bye.